Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a story that, quite honestly, sounds like the plot of a Hollywood thriller, but I promise you, it's entirely real. We're looking at the unbelievable journey of two sworn enemies, men who literally tried to kill each other, who somehow ended up joining forces to stop a civil war. It's a total masterclass in conflict resolution, and it challenges pretty much everything we think we know about making peace.
Okay, let's dive into this impossible premise. Can two former militia commanders actually mediate a deeply entrenched sectarian conflict? To figure that out, we have to look at the Interfaith Mediation Centre, or IMC, in Kaduna, Nigeria. You see, this isn't your standard story of diplomats shaking hands in some pristine boardroom. No, this is about raw, boots-on-the-ground peace-building, led by the exact same people who once fueled the violence.
Section 1. Roots of a Divided Region.
To really understand the battlefield here, we've got to rewind all the way back to the British colonial era under Lord Lugard. The administration used this policy of indirect rule. Basically, they insulated the northern Muslim government systems, leaving them totally intact, while at the same time restricting southern Christian missionary expansion to very specific geographic zones. Structurally, this drove a massive wedge right down the middle of the region. It institutionalized an us versus them reality long before modern politics even came into play.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how that historical divide eventually erupted into devastating modern violence. If you look at the flashpoints from 1987 through 2011, whether the spark was a college dispute, a marketplace relocation, or election results, the underlying dynamic was always exactly the same. Political elites weaponized religious identity to fight over land and power. The tragic result? Thousands of deaths and a permanently segregated geography.
And we absolutely cannot ignore the economic gasoline that was poured onto this fire. Back in the 1980s, massive macroeconomic shocks, specifically structural adjustment programs from the IMF and World Bank, completely dismantled local social safety nets. This led to skyrocketing youth unemployment and extreme, widespread frustration. It created the perfect storm. Local leaders found it incredibly easy to mobilize marginalized, angry young men into heavily armed religious militias.
Section 2. From Combatants to Peacemakers.
So, let's zoom in from that macro geopolitical scale down to the intensely personal and meet the two commanders who emerged from this chaos. On one side, we have Pastor James Movel Wuye. He was the leader of a retaliatory Christian youth militia, coming from a strict military family and driven by a fierce desire to counter perceived Islamic expansionism. On the other side is Imam Muhammad Nurayn Ashafa, commander of a Muslim youth defense league. Ashafa rejected the quietist Sufism of his father's generation for a highly activist political Islamism. Two brilliant, charismatic leaders, and both of them deeply, deeply radicalized. Their paths collided violently during the May 1992 Zangan-Kataf riots. Their forces engaged in direct tactical combat, and the personal trauma they inflicted on each other was immense. Christian militias killed two of Ashafa's cousins and brutally murdered his revered spiritual mentor. Meanwhile, during the heavy fighting, Wuye's right hand was entirely severed by a machete wielded by Ashafa's forces. Both men were left physically and psychologically scarred and completely consumed by a desire to assassinate one another.
But then, something remarkable happened. Now, it didn't happen to both of them at the exact same time. Ashafa experienced his spiritual awakening first after hearing a sermon about the Prophet Muhammad forgiving his attackers at Taif. It profoundly challenged his militant worldview. Wuye's shift took much longer. Years later, at a Christian conference, a fellow pastor challenged him with one simple piercing statement: "You cannot preach the gospel of Jesus with hatred in your heart." These non-synchronous, agonizing scriptural reckonings slowly pushed them toward the unthinkable: reconciliation.
But please, don't picture some cinematic, overnight embrace. Just listen to this quote from Pastor Wuye about their early days working together. "I had a persistent, secret urge to take a pillow and suffocate Ashafa while he slept." Wow. For 3 years they traveled together, literally sharing hotel rooms to save money on peace missions, all while fighting this incredible internal psychological friction. Genuine transformation in high conflict scenarios is messy, it's slow, and it is deeply internal.
Section 3. The Power of Warrior Capital.
So the crucial point is the core lesson of their eventual partnership. Their violent past actually became their greatest asset. It's a concept called warrior capital, or T-legit. It's the credibility you earn strictly through having fought. Think about it. When a well-meaning NGO worker tells a young fighter to lay down their weapons, they're usually just dismissed as completely out of touch. But when Pastor Wuye or Imam Ashafa tells a radicalized youth that peace is not surrender, it lands completely differently. They have literal skin in the game. They have the scars to prove it.
You can actually map this out like a formula, a balancing act of sorts. On the top, you have the heavy, entrenched burdens weighing a region down into conflict, things like marginalization, unemployment, and polarizing narratives. But look at what balances the scale on the bottom. Interfaith dialogue, fortified by warrior capital. This right here is why elite-led diplomacy so often fails. If diplomats fly in without that localized warrior legitimacy to counter extreme narratives, the peace treaty just won't hold on the streets.
And hey, this applies far beyond civil wars. Think about your own life or your workplace. The fundamental lesson is you have to match the mediator's lived credibility to what the conflicting parties actually need in order to trust the process. A manager who has survived a brutal corporate layoff carries infinitely more weight mediating a workplace dispute than an outside consultant who just read a book about it. Lived credibility is the ultimate currency. To wield this capital effectively, they knew they had to build an institution that was beyond reproach. Just look at the IMC's internal government structure. Wuye and Ashafa are co-executive directors. Underneath them is a 14-person secretariat split exactly down the middle, 7 Christians, 7 Muslims with rotating joint portfolios. This isn't just some generic corporate PR diversity. This is structural parity by design. It proves to both deeply divided communities that the mediation game is absolutely not rigged against them.
Section 4. A 4-phase peace model.
Let's move to the actual steps and see how this builds. With that flawless structural parity in place, they developed a highly disciplined procedural framework. Phase 1 is shuttle mediation, working behind the scenes to find the real triggers. Phase 2 is absolutely vital, intra-mediation. The groups meet separately along sectarian lines just to vent their anger without fear. Rushing people into a joint session too early is disastrous. Actually, it's only after that venting that we reach Phase 3, intermediation, where they share a space for compromise. And finally, Phase 4, a public, binding peace affirmation.
The ultimate test of this model came during the 2004 Yelwa-Shandam crisis. A long-running land dispute had exploded, tragically killing roughly 1,000 people. Wuye and Ashafa went in and deployed this exact 4-phase model. And they didn't just ask for hugs and apologies. They facilitated tangible joint policing and agricultural sharing agreements. The result? A localized peace treaty that has held for over 15 years of continuous, stable peace. Incredible.
Section 5. Scaling the peace. Successes like that don't stay a secret for long. By 2008, the rest of the world was paying attention. Wuye and Ashafa were invited to the Kenyan Rift Valley following horrific post-election violence between the Kikuyu and Kalenjin factions. By sharing their own extreme trauma and reconciliation, the two clerics broke the ice in a way no foreign diplomat ever could. They facilitated the reintegration of local marketplaces and the creation of community watch groups, proving for sure that their model worked across national borders.
But here is a very sobering number: 600. Ashafa himself has pointed out that success in active structural conflict is often deeply pragmatic. Sometimes success doesn't mean zero violence. It means reducing fatalities from 5,000 down to 600. Mediation is incredibly powerful, but it cannot instantly erase the underlying poverty, unemployment, or structural scarcity that fuels the fire in the first place.
Knowing that peace is a generational long game, the IMC celebrated its 30th anniversary in November 2025 by launching the Ashafa Peace Academy. This isn't just about Wuye and Ashafa anymore, it's about the next wave. They are now actively scaling their methodology, training young peacemakers across 56 Commonwealth nations to use warrior capital and structural parity in their own backyards.
Pastor Wuye summarized the emotional and practical core of their entire life's work during his Commonwealth address with these profound words: "Breaking the cycle of violence is a necessity. If we carry hate, we will use the slightest opportunity to vent on innocent people. Without forgiveness, you cannot have peace." It's a stark reminder that structural solutions absolutely require a foundation of deep, personal release.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We might not be out there mediating civil wars, but we all face deeply entrenched divides in our communities, our workplaces, and sometimes even our families. So how can we apply the lessons of warrior capital and structural empathy? Who has the lived credibility to bridge the gaps in your own life? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to think about how you can bring a little bit of this radical reconciliation into your own world.